Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful day here in Regina with a sparkly touch of hoarfrost on all the trees. I know we have people joining us today from across the country, and I hope you're having as lovely a day as we are. Before we begin our session today, I'd like to acknowledge that while today's event is taking place online, our center's physical home is located on the traditional territory of the lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota First Nations, and the traditional homeland of the Métis. We recognize Treaty 4, which was signed in this territory, and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past as we work for a better future through the work we do with communities. My name is Lynn Gidluck, and I am the Community Director for the University of Regina's Community Engagement and Research Center. And I am just delighted today to offer this workshop on equity, inclusion, and diversity essentials. I would also like to thank the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation for their generous sponsorship of our toolkit workshop series. In particular, thank you to Karen Henders, the Foundation's Director of Community and Grant Stewardship. Karen is a member of the Community Advisory Committee that helps us come up with ideas for the workshops we offer. Joining us today from that committee are Tracy Sandin from the Saskatchewan Health Authority and Elena Harrison from Inclusion Saskatchewan. Tracy is the person who came up with the idea for today's workshop, and Elena also serves on the Community Engagement and Research Center's Board of Directors. Thank you for serving our community by always being there to share your ideas on how the university and community can work together. Tracy reached out to me a few months ago to share with me that diversity, equity, and inclusion were very much top of mind for many of the organizations that she's involved with. And judging by the overwhelming response we've gotten to this workshop series, she obviously is correct in that assumption. And she said, and many other members of our Community Advisory Committee agreed with her, that there's a desire to start taking meaningful steps to making their workplaces and governing bodies for their nonprofits more inclusive and diverse. But where do we start? Well, I had the very good fortune to attend a webinar series hosted for University of Regina staff earlier in the year, led by one of today's facilitators. I was just blown away by Pauline Street's enthusiasm and warmth in sharing the knowledge that she's gained, by working in this area for over, decades, with public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. And, when I reached out to her, she jumped at the opportunity to share that knowledge with the community. So thank you, Pauline. And coincidentally, shortly after the idea was suggested to me for this workshop, another really inspiring and passionate person reached out to me. Our other facilitator today, Dr. Taiwo Afolabi. Taiwo just recently moved to Regina with his family, and he is a professor in the Faculty of Media, Art, and Performance, and he's also an artist scholar who's worked in over a dozen countries across 4 continents, and using theater and performance as spaces for dialogues about social justice, human rights, and anti-racism. He was looking for ways to connect to his new community. So I was delighted to introduce the two of them so that they could come together to put this series together. Now, one of the silver linings of this horrible pandemic that we find ourselves facing is that organizations like ours have been forced outside our comfort box to offer virtual programming that allows people who normally would not be able to attend our in-person events. And the same is true with university courses. Now, Dr. Afolabi will be teaching a remote course in the winter 2021 semester entitled Theater, Society, and Change. How interesting does that sound? Community building through theater? I hope some of you today will consider taking this class. Now, that's enough from me. I'm going to turn things over now to Pauline and Taiwo. So here you go.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend this session this morning. I am going to share my screen with you because I will start our presentation, providing you kind of an overview of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Following my presentation, Taiwo will engage you in an interactive activity to reinforce, I guess, some of the principles and concepts that I discussed. So if you give me just a moment, I will start my share. Okay. Now, I'm going to begin by talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's going to be equity, diversity, and inclusion versus equity, inclusion, and diversity. So these are kind of the essential elements that we think about when we consider EDI. So I guess to begin, if you are unfamiliar with the concept equity, I'm going to provide you kind of a breakdown of what equity is. It's creating a barrier-free working or studying environment, depending upon, I guess, the nature of the industry, what you're working in, what you're doing. It's implementing or addressing positive policies and practices that ensure a degree of representation. And I will elaborate on these terms a little bit more. But when we think about equity, equity is not the same as equality. So when we think about equity, equity's roots are in employment equity legislation. This legislation was first introduced in 1984 through Judge Rosalie Abella, who assembled a small committee to look at the experiences faced by four groups within our community and the success that they had advancing in employment. The equity legislation, however, was not fully established until 1986. Within that, it relied on persuasion as well as a little embarrassment to get people to do what the legislation set out to do. Reporting for employment equity was done at a federal level, and in 1995, fines of $50,000 were introduced to any employer who did not comply with employment equity legislation. But please don't be confused. When we say that fines were introduced in 1995, very few organizations were ever fined for not achieving representation data or representation. So Canadians' federal employment equity laws affect only federally regulated industries that are established according to the Constitution. The industries include telecommunications, uranium mining, federal crown corporations, banking, railroads, airlines, shipping and transportation across provincial boundaries. All other businesses are affected only by the laws of the province in which they operate, and this includes education and non-federally funded research. So, although there is the overarching federal legislation, anything that occurs within a province with respect to employment equity is affected by, or is the laws of that province are what organizations are to refer to. So, when we think about employment equity, employers are not required to take measures that would cause undue hardship to an employer. And when we think about undue hardship, it's basically the cost of doing equity would basically bankrupt or break the organization. They're also not required to hire or promote people who do not meet the essential qualifications of the job. So when job descriptions are developed, there are things that individuals must be able to do in order to achieve the outcomes of the job. Employers are not required to hire people or promote people who do not meet those qualifications. They're not required as well to hire or promote people without basing such actions on merit. So individuals need to demonstrate that they possess the skill, the ability, and so forth in order to do the job as opposed to being hired or promoted. And neither are employers required to create new positions within their workforce in order to achieve equity. Employers can designate jobs for equity group members, but there's still qualifications, experience, knowledge that is required to be attracted to or applied to those jobs. And these are not special jobs, so to speak, that it's a reduction in what is expectation in order to fill the obligation of the role. For the purpose, though, of implementing employment equity, employers are required to collect information and analyze their workforces. They're required to conduct employee systems review of the policies and practices in order to identify employment and barriers for designated group members that result from those practices and policies. So, what this is saying is that basically employers are required to do an audit of their policies and practices for employment to ensure that they do not disadvantage anyone that belongs to the designated groups. So, who gets counted? You may be wondering. So, with respect to employment equity, it's any employee who voluntarily identifies themselves to their employer or agree to be identified by an employer as a designated group member. So, what are the designated groups? They're Indigenous people, racialized groups, or visible minorities. As of 2020, there are the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, two spirit plus grouping. There are people with disabilities, and there are women. And the reason that these groups have been designated is because of historical disadvantage in employment. Employment equity legislation was put in place to address this disadvantage so that workplaces reflected our greater communities. So I indicated that there were two things employers were required to do. One was to measure, I guess, or to report on what their employee composition looked like. And then the other was an employee systems review. So an employee systems review is an identification and analysis of the systems, the policies, and practices employed by the employer. It's an identification of which systems, policies, and practices have the potential to create barriers for access, for entry, for promotion, for mobility for employees that belong to the 5 designated groups. They provide the basis for corrective action to remove barriers. So if a barrier is identified and it is known to be problematic or to limit points of access, points of entry, points of mobility for equity group members, the employee systems review will flag that, but also help the employer to identify what can be done within the organization to prevent further harm or damage. And then it also assesses the potential for reasonable accommodation to overcome valid barriers. And so when we talk about reasonable accommodation, this is across all groups. So oftentimes I think people assume when we talk about accommodation, we think only disability. But reasonable accommodation could be for religious reasons. It could be for ability or disability reasons. It could be for family related leave responsibilities or family related commitments. And it's just reasonable accommodation. So it's nothing that is so far reaching that it cannot be addressed. It needs to be reasonable in when we think about providing, I guess, the accommodation. And oftentimes, I'm just going to loop back to this because I have spent time working in a not-for-profit it was a cross disability agency. For individuals who require accommodation for disability, oftentimes the cost of those accommodations are not significant. And generally, the individual with disability is most aware of what type of accommodation they may require. So I always encourage people never to let hiring an individual with a disability be a challenge or be problematic or be a concern, because I know several years ago it was estimated that the maximum cost for providing an accommodation was under $1,000. So question you may have is, how does employee data and employee systems review influence institutional or organizational practice? Well, there's a couple of ways in which it does. It identifies areas where there are gaps in representation of employees from the designated groups. So if your organization is small or if your organization is large, this will flag for you if there are gaps in representation. Do you have people who look like me in your organization? And I can use myself as an example. Do you have people who are racialized as well as gender or sexually diverse? So as a woman, do you have women? Do you have women of color? Do you have people of color? Do you have Indigenous people? Do you have people with disabilities? It also highlights any gaps that may be due to formal or informal policies and practices related to recruitment, selection, attitudes, culture, promotion, accommodation, retention, and termination. And just to provide you an example of types of gaps, if your organization has hired individuals, and I will use myself again as an example. Say, for instance, you've hired racialized groups, people from racialized groups. And if your turnover of individuals from racialized groups appears to be high in a particular area, you may want to go back after looking at that data to see whether or not there is something going on within that particular area that is causing racialized group members to leave the organization. And that's just an example, but oftentimes if we evaluate policies and processes and how we recruit, how we select, culture, promotion, accommodation, there may be something that may be revealed. So when we think about promoting equity, it is not pushing a banner program like affirmative action. Although there is counting of diverse groups and representation, it is not an affirmative action program, where affirmative action was generally hiring for numbers or hiring unqualified people in order to meet a quota so that the organization could say, check, 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 we've done this. Employment equity, on the other hand, is not. And that is why I provided you that information about what employers are required to do and what they're not required to do. And that's where the separation between employment equity and affirmative action is quite clear. So I've given you kind of a quick and dirty overview of what equity is based on legislation in the Canadian context. Oftentimes, people confuse employment equity and diversity and assume that they're the same thing. But diversity defined is different. It's a condition of having or being composed of different elements. It's an instance of being composed of different elements or qualities. And synonyms for diversity include assortment, heterogeneous, manifold, miscellaneous, multifarious, multiplicity, and variety. So diversity is difference or differing elements. Diversity in with respect to people are the differences that exist between them. The differences are based on primary and secondary dimensions. So when we think about primary dimensions of diversity, they're at the center, and I will use you as an example, is you, your gender identity, your race, your ethnicity, your age, your sexual orientation, and your ability are all primary dimensions of what makes you diverse. And these are often things that people will first see. And I'm not going to say make judgments on, but they're things that people will first see. With respect to your secondary dimensions, there's you at the center, there's your education, your communication style, your language or accent, your religion, your working or learning style, your marital status, your geographic location, as well as your appearance. Those are the secondary dimensions. Although people do look at these and they do evaluate these, the primary and the secondary do work somewhat. Well, they do work in unison, or they do work together. But these are the things that we generally think about with what we think about what makes us different. So the primary and secondary dimensions of diversity debunk commonly held diversity myths. So now remember, if we are a primary and our secondary dimensions, members of a particular group are all the same as a myth. And I bring this up because I'll use my siblings, for instance, as an example. Um, Same parents, all of us. Majority of us were born in Great Britain, raised here in Canada. My youngest brother was born here. However, we are not the same. And I'm using the family unit as an example only to say that, yes, we have commonalities, same DNA. But as people that were raised in the same household, we are all very different. So even though we have closer links than being from the same group, we have the same DNA, we are not the same people. So when you think about hiring and when you think about how we make sometimes generalizations or extrapolations about groups of people, keep in mind that people from the same group differ significantly. People have one static identity. We don't have a static identity. We have multiple identities, and our identities reveal themselves depending on circumstance, situation, who we're interacting with, when, and how. And I think about my parents are Jamaican, and I'm giving you a lot of information about me. I was born in England. I was raised in Canada. And I do know for myself, and this is not that I do know that when I go to England as the last child born there, when I go back to England, how my family treats me, how they treat me, even when I go through the airport and they look at my Canadian passport that indicates I'm British born, they give me a welcome home, even though Canada, in my mind, is my home. When I go to Jamaica with family, I also know that having Jamaican blood, being in family, being British born, Canadian raised, it also changes. And I'm not saying I personally change, but also how I'm identified changes. So my identity, even if it's put on me by other people, is not static. How I feel in the various geographic regions, depending upon who I'm with, I believe also changes. And this isn't to say that I'm not a consistent human being. It's just the interaction, social circumstance changes a great deal for me. And then the last bullet that I do have is that only members of the majority group are prejudiced. And this is something that I need to bring forward because we need to be aware that our majority status changes depending upon where we go, who we're interacting with, where we've traveled to, how we're engaging, that we are not always the majority and it is fleeting. But to also think that only majority group members can be prejudiced is a misnomer. I believe each grouping of people has been taught things about other groups of people. And I'm not saying that people act on it. What I am going to say, though, is that in terms of how knowledge is transferred and brought to the fore, there is no one group that has a premium on prejudice. Each group has their own. So when we think about diversity legislation is non existent. Diversity is often promoted as or in conjunction with employment equity legislation. And people often confuse the two. When we talk about doing diversity, people assume it's employment equity, and it's not. There are no timelines or targets for achieving diversity, and employers make a choice as to whether or not they wish to have a diverse work environment. However, like I'd indicated, federally regulated organizations have, from an employment equity standpoint, there is that legislation, as well as from provinces for employment equity, there is that legislation, and all provinces establish targets for what representation or what the diversity of their workforce should look like. So, why diversity? Well, even though it's not legislated, it's the right thing to do. Having a workforce that is representative of the communities that you serve will do a number of things, like provide competitive advantage with respect to recruiting talent, employee commitment, productivity, innovation, as well as institutional reputation. So, if you are an organization that serves a diverse community, wouldn't you like people to say, geez, I like going to that organization because when I go there, the group that I interact with is diverse, they're welcoming, they're they do creative things, that they have tremendous insight, that I can see that they love their jobs just by how they engage, how they interact. So having diverse workforces does change things and it does elevate things. And like I currently work in a very diverse team or on a very diverse team. And when I first got there, I'd sit and I would listen and I would smile from time to time because the group was from everywhere, but you could hear it through the conversations and through the dialogue, the commitment that they had and that they shared, and that they were productive. And at times there'd be like a hint of almost competitiveness that was with them in order to kind of elevate the bar. So doing diversity is truly the right thing to do. So I'm just going to ask you to consider the advantages diversity could bring to your organization. You don't need to tell me what they are, but just think for a moment about what diversity could do if your current work group is not diverse. So the last section that I will speak to before I turn this over to Tebu is what is inclusion? We've talked about equity. We've talked about diversity. Now we're going to talk a little bit about inclusion. Within inclusion or with inclusion, what is it? It's the achievement of a work environment where all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. They have access or equal access to opportunities and resources, and they can contribute fully to the success of the organization. So, in an environment where people feel safe, and to use a concept that's often used, that people feel they can bring their whole selves to work, to school, to the organization. And when we think about what it is to bring our whole self, it means that, I have a real quirky sense of humor. So to feel that I can bring my whole self to work means that I can show up at work. And although people might not laugh at jokes, my jokes or what have you, but I know that I can say them and they kind of know who I am. And they know that, her humor, maybe it's kind of the British born influence, her humor is a little bit funny. But, knowing that I can be that person. But even with that as well, they also know that because I've got Jamaican blood that runs through me, that I come from a group or a family of people where we would sit at the dinner table and we would talk. And we would talk, and it would get loud sometimes because we were exchanging ideas and opinions and what have you. But at the end of the day, we'd walk away and nobody was mad. And so to understand it, that I can bring my whole self is I can be expressive. I can be as expressive as I'd like to without being disrespectful, rude, or harmful to people. But people just know that's me, that Pauline's a little excited about something. Her tone's going to go up. She's going to be animated, but she's not angry. So that's a part of bringing your whole self to work. So when we think about inclusion, it's about being able to be you, your race, your gender and sexual identity, your ability, your gender, your appearance, your marital status, ethnicity, education, all of the elements of you, it doesn't matter. You can be who you are and you can show up at the workplace and be safe. So, environments that are inclusive are free from barriers, they're free from discrimination, they're also free from intolerance. Inclusive environments are also supportive, respectful, and open. And their openness is probably what's crucial in some respects, that people can be themselves without fear of judgment or harsh treatment or, you know, discrimination or people not tolerating them for being who they are. So openness is critical. And the last thing I forgot to say is that they're accessible to everyone. So that concludes my segment of the presentation. Thank you for your time. I am going to turn this over to Dr. Aflobe. I know that he has an interactive component for you. So if you have a cell phone or your computer, what we will ask you to do is to get it out and to go to www.menti.com. And I'm going to stop sharing, and Dr. Aflobe is going to share his screen with you, and he will provide you the code to log into once you're in Menti.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pauline, and welcome to everyone. Before we go to menti.com, I just want to kind of just get us up our feet. And, I know we're sitting in front of the screen. And so if you have the opportunity to just stand up, if that's something you can do wherever you are, if you're comfortable with having your video on, that's also good. But just stand up a little bit and just want to just kind of shake up. What I mean by shake up is just shake your body, your hands, just stretch. For me, I've been sitting here for like 3 hours now. So just stretch yourself a little bit and, just give yourself the freedom to shake, right? And you can even yawn. And of course, we don't have to see you do that on, on your camera, but whatever you're comfortable with, just stretch yourself. I can see someone just shaking your head and just kind of, that's a good one too. Just
just let the blood flow over your body, right from the head to your toe, you know. So, all right. And if you want to put up your camera, that's good too. Just do that for like 1 more minute, and you know, some are not standing up, or just try to stretch your leg a little bit, even if you're sitting down, you know. Your hands at times, you know, we're on the computer, just stretch stuff, right? Just stretch it. Ah, okay. Good. Thank you for doing that. I feel better. Okay. We're going to go to menti.com, and I will type here the passcode that I would have you use. Is 3829682. I just typed that now to the chat. It's 3829682. Are we there? If you're there, just give me a thumbs up or just say yes or something.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's good.
Great. Okay. Before I go into some of the questions that we're going to be looking into.
Sorry. Hi. What was that website again? Menchi or Menci?
I'm just going to type that again, menti.com or mentimeter.com. Any of that works. Sorry, Menti, not Penti. Sorry, Menti.
Okay.
Meter.
Oh,
Thank you.
MENTEE, Menti. Oh, okay. Just
Mentimeter.com, yes.
okay.
Okay. Are we there now? So just to kind of, just to a recap of what Paulina's kind of taken us through. Oh my goodness, somebody's there already. Thank you. Okay. So I have a question there. Now that we kind of heard like, close to 30 minutes of what EDI is, in your own words, just recap, just, you know, what does that mean? What does it mean to you? And I'm seeing someone, you know, unity, identity, safe, uplift, whole self, embrace. I'm not sure if you can, I'm trying to share my screen here. I'm seeing supportive, open, unique, inclusion, belonging, acceptance, okay? Safe, respectful, creative. Nice. Words that keep coming. Let it keep coming. Whatever word comes. So safe is something that is more pronounced. So it's taking the center of the piece. I'm trying to share my screen here. For some reasons, it's not, my market's not allowing me to. Okay, welcoming difference. Great, thank you. So that's good, thank you. I will move to the next question. Can we see the next question? Yes? Not yet.
Can we see that? No? Yes?
No,
Okay. On your Menti, you can go to the next question. There's going to be move to next question. Yeah.
It's saying that we're waiting for the presenter to show next slide.
I'm showing it here. Is he there?
Oh, there we go.
Okay. It's just the technology. Also, now you can see the responses because my computer is not allowing me to share for some reasons. But we have what's like safety, what's like belonging, supporting. What's the, for you, is there overlap? What's the clear difference between these terms, EDI? What's the difference for you? How does it relate together? There are options that you can write that, whether in one word or in different words, in a sentence, in a phrase. Somebody said overlap and safety. Yes, clear differences, not sure how to articulate them. Okay. Overlap. Somebody said they are all positive impacts words. They make the world better. They all allow people to be their strongest, smartest, and best selves. Inclusion and diversity is equal to equity, different but all under the same umbrella. They bring diversity, acceptance and respect of each individual, clear difference. However, they are all related. Belonging. Somebody said they are all related, but with distinct definitions. Okay, and it's keep with what's still coming. Somebody said integrated. Someone says, what I noticed the most is that having successfully recruited a diverse talent pool does not automatically denote inclusiveness within the company or group. Somebody says, like a Venn diagram, some things relate, they emphasize different aspects. Great, thank you for all of that. Okay. So now that that's kind of two questions, just kind of recap, some of the ideas that Paulina, did put us through. So thanks to Pauline. What I like to do in the next few minutes is really go through some couple of questions with us. And the reason why I kind of go through this route is some of these questions can be very, very personal. And of course, it kind of relates to the organizations we're at or we're representing, or wherever we're coming from. So these questions, we're posing them and responding to them. We're going to be bringing all of these responses together. We're going to capture them and send it to Lynn so that we can send that to all of you. So the next question I'm going to be asking, and hopefully you can see that now. So if you move on, if you see it, please just let me know. If not, let me know. It might just be just a few seconds. You should have it now. Think for a moment about the diversity of your own team or organization, and what is it like? Do we have the question now? On Mentimeter, do we have it? Can you see it?
Yes, it's there.
Okay. And this again, all these questions, they're anonymous. So whatever you write, that's fine. Nobody knows who is writing what. So now I'll be reading out that responses as you're thinking about it. Think for a moment about the diversity of your own team or organization. What is it like? Somebody says we have very little diversity. Someone says not very diverse. Someone says low level of diversity. Someone says excellent. Someone says I'm one of the few African-American case managers and I'm able to connect with my community more through my race. They are more open to connect with me. Somebody says homogeneous, great, a real good mixture of all peoples and faith.
A very good time, a very great time, but we greatly lack diversity within our internal team. We have great diverse connections with other organizations. Another person says, it is pretty well diverse. However, in positions of leadership, the board representation of women and people of color are largely underrepresented. Okay, and I'm just going to be reading some of those comments because I think that it might be popping up to really think about other people's responses. And now that we're using word diversity and inclusion and equity, I'm hoping that with the first part of the session, we now be able to tease at least some of the differences between them. Someone says the diversity in our organization is extremely lacking. Like-mindedness and experience is valued above all else. And outside ideas face a lot of resistance. So even there's a group that says that even though they lack the diversity in their organization, they are well connected to other organizations. They are connected to them, to the ideas. And there's another organization that even though they lack diversity, they still are not well connected. They still, other ideas coming from the outside are facing a lot of resistance, okay? Someone says organizational culture is toxic. Someone says good gender diversity, but not racially diverse. Very good at headquarters. And the person give a number of staff that can speak 9 languages among them. So, and I'm not gonna say those numbers in case we don't know who that is. Okay, so I'll just leave that. We're gonna go to the next question. But the idea is that for us to start thinking the interconnection of these terms and how that kind of relate to us in our organization. We go to the next one. You can click on next. You should hopefully see it now. How do you think your lived experience will change if you were of a different race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion than you were? And really thanks to Pauline, when she was really presenting, she kind of put herself out there, looking at, she's of Jamaican heritage, born in Britain, here now raised in Canada. For me, originally from Nigeria, born in Nigeria, now in Canada. So if you, regardless of your position in your organization, just think about that question. Hopefully we can see that now. Good. I'm seeing things pop up now. How do you think your lived experience will change if you were of a different race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion than you were? And I'm going to be reading the responses as words are coming in. Someone says different worldview, different privilege. Someone says less opportunity, more noticeable. Opportunities may differ. Someone says face more obstacles. Someone used the word radically. I'm seeing the word fear and really popping up a lot. So it's taking the center stage. Now the word more barriers is popping up. Another word says face more sexism, tougher to gain understanding, not as many opportunities, hesitant, that's a word someone wrote, assumptions, that's another person's word. Someone says worried. Someone says get a better job. Now fear is taking more space. The same thing as more obstacles is another word, more obstacles, more discrimination, marginalized in different ways. So it's kind of interesting. Those words are, another word is shy and hard. So it's kind of interesting. From these responses, I think we have really interesting people coming from different backgrounds and different lived experience, or the other way around. So it's really interesting. Okay. Thanks for that. I'm just gonna move on to the next question that I have here.
What do you see as the lived experience of diversity? Less opportunity.
So the next, if you click next, what is the experience? That is the question, the next question. What is the experience for individuals who are minority within your organization? And really, again, in connection to the first presentation, around what each of those words really mean, and in reflection to our organization that we're representing or that we're part of. So what is the experience, if you can, I hope we can see the next question. So what is the experience for individuals who are the minority within your organization? You can answer that. Hopefully, can we all see that? Can we see that question?
We can see it, but you can't enter any words to provide options.
Ah. Oh, okay. That's weird. Okay, come in. Should be able to do that. So you can't write anything?
No.
Huh. Okay.
No, we select which option. That's the only thing we can do.
Oh, I get you. Okay, I get what you're saying now. Okay. Oh, that might be me. Oh, goodness. Uh, can you see anything?
There's options now.
Excellent, good, fair, not good, poor. Can we see any of that?
Yeah.
Okay. Apologies about that. Are we? Can we all see? Can we all see this? Can we all see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And for option 6 is basically indifference at this point in time. I'm just gonna write that, or unsure rather. So when we, because I know that we still have good, we still have time. So at some point we're going to go into breakout sessions, and I want us to note this question, this particular question, because one of the things we're going to be doing in that session when we break out into different rooms would be us really sharing what right now excellent is at number 7. Good is at number 14. Fair is at number 17. Not good is at number 9. Poor is at number 2. Unsure is at number 4. And when we get to that group, we're going to be really talking about that. So that's one. So we're going to come back to that question when we go to our breakout rooms. I'm just going to give us a few more seconds to answer that particular question. What is the experience for individuals who are the minority within your organization? Whether, and we're talking about minority now in the whole context of EDI, you know, the totality of you, like Pauline was talking about, whether the secondary or the primary. Is it sexual orientation? Is it education? Is it gender? Is it religion? Is it faith and things like that? That's what we mean by all of that coming together, not just a particular sect of that, but everything. Okay. Thank you for that. So we'll move on to the next question. Hopefully this one, we should be able to, oh my goodness, okay. Okay, so what I will do is we're gonna so what I will do is so right now we take a break on Mentimeter. We're gonna go to our we're gonna go into breakout rooms. Then we come back to finish. We have two last questions to finish this session once we're back from the breakout rooms. Is Pauline, Pauline and Lynn, are you there?
Yes, I am, Tewu.
Okay.
Would you like me to assign or send people to breakout rooms?
Yes, please.
How many breakout rooms would you like? Like everybody has returned.
Okay.
So I will turn it back over to Tewu.
Okay. Well, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. And there were two questions I think we tried to broadcast. I hope we did see that. So what I'd like us to do now in all the breakout sessions that we have, we had two questions. And I know that the first question I asked was on Mentimeter. And it's kind of boxed it into excellent, good, fair, not good, poor, and unsure. And it's a question that really involves a lot of experience with different people based on where they're coming from and what they're at. And that's why we started with that in our group to share what I experienced. So if we can just, based on from your group, one person or two can just, anybody can share what was the conversation about in your group with that question. What's the experience for individuals who are the minority within your organization? I know I was in one group and I heard some of the things that were said. So if we have one or two persons in a group, we just want to share with the bigger group what your group talked about. That would be great. And anybody can do that. You can raise your hand and
I'll go because I think like the silence is actually speaks to kind of sort of what our group talked about is that like there is definitely like this underlying tension and difference in experiences, but that generally like people are scared to have these conversations and nobody ever wants to say the wrong thing or offend anybody. And then it creates this void where we like all know this thing is happening and we can all feel it, but no one's talking about it. And in my personal experience, like I didn't say this in the group, but I think that that's largely due to like our culture of white supremacy. Like an effect of that is perfectionism, and like we are like faulted to be the carriers of like knowledge and know best, and we're just like scared to do anything wrong or say the wrong thing. And I think that's something that we need to, I'm not articulating it right, but like something that we need to move past to really be able to have like these authentic conversations.
Thank you, Michelle. Another person want to add to that or what you talked about in your group? Well, I think maybe why we're thinking about that, from me as a person of color, I think with that question, something that I normally experience is that question is always deferred to me or to someone that looks like me. Like, well, I'm not a minority, I can't speak to that. No, you can, because, and that's one of trying to defer that question to me, for example, to someone that look like me. Well, I'm not a minority. I don't want to speak to that person's experience. But what have you heard about someone that is of the minority that you love to share, whether that is valid, whether that is not yours, or yet it is or not? That's something that my own personal experience with that question, for example, that I normally get. Like, I don't want to speak about it because I am not, which can be, again, putting burden on me as a person from that group. So thanks, Michelle, for sharing that. Yes, I think I hear someone.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is JB, and I'm working in a nonprofit organization. I can consider this group as a small group, but because we deal with our clients, and I can consider myself as a minority. And I am a Filipino, as I heard from someone who speaks about Filipino earlier. Like yeah, I am a Filipino, but myself, I can consider myself as someone who can easily deal with. It is I am a minority in my group for now, but our clients are more of really diverse group of people. But I may be a minority, but it is for me, it is just a matter of how you communicate, how you share your culture, how you be open to everyone. So in that way, I never I never feel that I am a minority. So in our office, there's only a group of 4 to 5, and I consider myself also that. But because I consider myself as the one who always shares my culture, so for me it is just a matter of how you communicate with them and how you present your or how you deal with them. So yeah, just like that. So I may be a minority, but I never feel that.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Javi, and thank you for sharing. Um, Please know that when I did the breakdown of employment equity categorizations, those are federally identified terms. I suspect, based on the information that you've shared, that your relationships are based on kind of the humanness of yourself and your colleagues. Because we're still having this conversation, not all spaces have crossed into that realm. And it's kind of getting the collective group. And I'm not speaking to all of you that are a part of this Zoom call, but it's how do we move the collective? And this is our greater communities to that space where people can show up and simply be who they are and share and feel welcome and feel a part. And that's the ultimate end goal. And people have been at this long before I was born. So, and I know how long I've been on this earth plane. So, it's incremental steps. It's having the interest, the desire for the conversation and the dialogue, and keep sharing. That's all I can encourage you to do is keep sharing.
Thanks, Pauline. I'm really conscious of our time. I have one last question on the Mentimeter. And so if we go back to that Mentimeter, and it's the code again is 3829682. So the last question that and after that I would, okay, we see that already. What steps can be taken to create a safe space? Another way to put that would be to, sense of belonging. Somebody was just talking about sharing how in personal experience, sharing how in culture and things like that. So I would just kind of want to wrap up with this because there are times that this conversation can be so heavy that we're silent because it can be very uncomfortable to have. Based on some of the responses also, they're diverse, organizations and things that people are doing already. So what steps can be taken to create a safe space, a sense of welcoming, a sense of belonging in your organization? So I'm just going to be reading some of the things that we're saying already on Mentimeter. Openness, somebody says education, somebody says equitable hiring, encourage openness, listen, humility, share experiences, respectful questions, and respectful questioning, encouragement, open conversation, allow listening, discussions, fair agenda, elevate voices, allow for conversation, policy changes, which Pauline was talking about the other time, legislation and things like that, and how that affect what we're doing. Kind, willingness to learn, training. 3 words that kind of pop out a lot: respect, education, openness. Respect, education, openness. And I'm going to download, we're going to send all of these responses that these questions today. We're going to send it so that everybody can be able to see that. With that, we hand over back to Pauline.
Well, I guess we have about 6 minutes remaining.
That's right.
We can open the floor to questions if there are any questions from you as a group. We ask, I guess, that you use either the hand raise feature, but I know that you guys are kind of a quieter group. So if you don't wish to raise your hand, by all means, just insert your question. If we have multiple people speaking, we will just address you one at a time. Elsha or Elsa? Elsha? Would you like to ask a question? Yes, go ahead, Elsa, or Elsha 2016. That's how you present on my screen.
Oh, hi.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I'm not on my site, so probably that's why I was a bit confused. But yeah, the question I have relates to that whole thing about race. Partly because maybe I come from a space of human rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that frames most of the things we are talking about in terms of inclusion, equity, and diversity. We all know about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and the history of exclusion and inequality. So I struggle with the social construct of race and how many times we still continue to recreate that there's the other race. I fully consider myself a human being, and I'm amazed at how even people who are scholars or who have studied this subject area still think about people as like I'm white or I'm black or I'm yellow or I'm red. Thank God, actually, there's been a lot of progress that people no longer talk about yellow people or red people, like, but this continued discourse that talks about Black people and white people, continuing that dichotomy and continuing the racialization, and unaware of the psychological trauma, historical and persisting, that we continue to create when we dehumanize the other. I don't know.
I'm going to just make a comment. It depends, I guess, on how you accept the term and what the terms mean to you. When we think about as people, and I'm going to say this, we are all one race, and that's the human race. End of story. I look at the reference to color as simply a shortcut in describing people in a respectful way. You could use the term Caucasian or Negro, depending upon where you come from and how that language is used and how some of the language has been bastardized. My preference is simply call me Black. And the reason why I say this, and I'm going to be clear and I'm going to explain to you why. I traveled with one of my colleagues. We were in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan for a conference. The conference had come to an end, and I'm a smoker, so I was out behind the hotel smoking. And he was looking for me for us to make the journey home. He couldn't find me. And he goes, Pauline, I asked people if they'd seen you. And I said, well, how did you describe me? Well, I said you were tall. I said you were lean back then. I said you were wearing this and that. And I looked at him and I said, did you tell them I was Black? And he goes, oh, I couldn't do that. And I said, of course you could. And the reason why he could is it was a shortcut. Because of where we're geographically located, because of that conference, I would have been maybe one of 2 Black women at that event. If he would have identified me in that way, it would have reduced all the hassle, and maybe I would have left the smoking lounge and been in the car and we could have been on our way home. So I think it's how we internalize certain things, but if you know that we are all one race and it's a human race, and if we can be humanistic in how we engage and interact with other people, labels are merely just labels. They don't have a lot of meaning. I think it's what we ought to do with them that creates the barriers. When we say people of color, it just means that we are beautiful hues. I'm going to say from beige to black. We're just beautiful hues. That's all. We're all people. We're all humans. And I have 1 minute to closure. So thank you for that, Elsa 2016.
I would just kind of like to take the opportunity to thank Pauline and Taiwu so much for doing this. Everybody, I think it's important for you to know that they're doing this on their own time. Both are really, really busy people, and both of them were just so wonderful to work with. And it's just my privilege to get to know you and to introduce you to this broader community of people who I think came here all for the right reasons. We want to make our communities better. And I hope you'll all join us again on December 9th, where we're going to have our next session, diving deeper, where Pauline and Taiwu will be back again, this time looking a little bit more closely at how we would develop and integrate equity, diversity, inclusion into our board and some of our organizational policies. So with that, we've come to the end of our time. And again, just thanks everybody here today for joining us. And I will be sending a survey out later with the slides that Pauline and Taiwu will share with me to share with you, as well as a recording of the session, so that if your colleagues and friends in your organization would like to learn more, they can have the chance to listen as well. So thanks, and have a great rest of your day.